Hi and welcome to a video that I should have taped last year or early last year, but I'm just videotaping it now because it's the way to go. Anyway, this is going to be... I'm sorry, I did not say hi. Hi, my name is Amy and welcome to my welcome to another video in which I will be talking about the books that I've read in 2 months last year. And this is going to be my May and June wrap-up. I'm using my phone today because I'm currently rushing the rendering of my other video. But yeah, the first book I read in the month of May is Famous Last Words by Katie Alender. I gave this book 3 stars. This book is a thriller book about our main character Willa, who moves to Hollywood after her dad dies, and her mom remarries this big time director dude, and so they move to this big house in Hollywood. At the same time that they move to Hollywood, there is this like serial killer who murders these actresses and stages it in a way that makes them look like certain scenes from old movies. So Willa, once she moves into her stepdad's house, starts to have these paranormal experiences, such as having these weird daydreams and flashbacks about certain person that all kind of ties in with the whole mystery of the killer. Throughout this book, our main character also meets a bunch of side characters, such as Reed, who is the like handsome assistant of her stepdad. Another character is Marnie, who befriends her. She meets Marnie in like their expensive school and they kind of strike a friendship. She also meets this other guy, Wyatt, who is obsessed with the mentioned killer in Hollywood. He's kind of the weird guy who's all alone and just spends all of his time investigating this Hollywood murderer. So yeah, okay, let's move on to my likes. First thing I liked about this book is the pacing, because it was such a great page turner. Even though there were a lot of scenes that were kind of corny, it still managed to keep me interested throughout the book. And once the mystery started to unfold, it was kind of hard to stop reading and go to bed. The next thing I liked is the slightly creepy paranormal stuff that goes on in this book. I usually read at night before I sleep, and during the time I read this, I had to read in the living room because my cousin who slept with me here in my room didn't want me reading until like 3:30 because she slept earlier than I did, so I had to read by myself most of the time in the living room. So it kind of gave me chills to read the paranormal stuff, and I kind of felt that someone was watching me when I was reading this, so that's a plus, I guess. Next thing I liked about this book is I really liked the unique thing that the serial killer does in the book, in which he reenacts scenes from old films. I think that was a little, we kind of like our killers to be a little creative with what they do in fiction. It made the plot a lot more interesting and the character background of the serial killer more interesting, and kind of made him or her stand out as a serial killer, because there are a lot of serial killers who do a lot of crazy stuff, and I think the fact that he has this specific way of killing his victims also made him unique and stand out, like I've been saying for over and over. Okay, things that I disliked about this book is how the killer was kind of predictable. From the moment our main character met this person, I already had an inkling that maybe it was him or her. I don't know if there was foreshadowing or something, or it was just something that one would immediately think, because it was, when you kind of try to figure out who the murderer is, you kind of go to the least likely, and I guess he or she kind of is the least likely person to be the killer, which makes him or her the most predictable suspect of all the ones that you would think of. Next thing I disliked about this book was that part when Willa had like a makeover and she was instantly transformed into this like supermodel looking person. It was kind of unrealistic. It's just annoying and very, I guess, YA how this transformation of just her putting on makeup and putting on a fancy dress made her instantly become this supermodel-esque kind of person, and it was kind of cringe-worthy to also see how other characters reacted to her transformation. So that's that. Okay, I'm gonna shelve that there. Next book I read is The Power of Six by Pittacus Lore. I gave this book 4 stars. This book is the second book to the I Am Number 4 or Loring Legacy series. I can't really tell you what happens in the book because that would be kind of spoilery, but if you want to get to know more about my opinions on this book, and spoilers are okay for you, or if you've already read the series and want to know my thoughts, go on right ahead and click to the upper right part of the screen so you can go watch what I thought about this book. I really like this one more than the first book, like I said in my review, and yeah, it's pretty good. Next book I read is Salem Slot by Stephen King. So I gave this book 3 stars. In summary, this book is a retelling of Bram Stoker's Dracula. This book is about a bunch of characters who live in like a small and dingy, almost unknown town where everyone just drives by. The main characters in the book kind of realize a lot of weird stuff that's going on in the town, a lot of people disappearing or are found dead. As the story progresses, the characters try to rationalize everything and find reasons for what is happening in their town. And then after they kind of wrap their minds around the impossible being a possibility or the fiction probably becoming a reality for them, they start to plan to fight against the evil in this town, and it kind of is, it's a riveting tale, I guess. So moving on to what I liked about this book, I really liked the plot of this book because it was similar enough to Dracula, but also it kind of diverted a little more so that it would kind of fit into a closer time to ours right now. It made me want to visit and read the actual book from which it was based. Another thing that I liked about this book is how the characters developed gradually, especially taking into account how they were trying to like wrap their minds around this paranormal thing that is happening to their town, which they only thought of as fiction. They took their time in trying to accept it. They rationalized it a lot, which made it realistic because it was happening in like modern times. I also liked the main characters themselves, especially because they were smart, they were tactical, they were rational, and they were very much brave. Despite them having these great qualities, they were also scared and flawed, which made them realistic characters. Overall, they were a great ensemble in like fighting this evil in their town. Okay. Next, moving on to what I disliked. I didn't like the side characters because I mixed them up a lot, and at the start of the book there was kind of this chapter, I think the lot, yeah, in which like so many of the side characters were introduced one after the other, so it was kind of confusing to follow and to remember because a lot of them were kind of similar, and I did mix them up a lot at the beginning of the book, but then when it kind of progressed and a lot of them died, it got a lot easier to follow. However, some of the side characters did have interesting backgrounds. There were characters who were very vivid and very much kind of gave you an idea of the effects of living in such a town where there wasn't much civilization, is that right to say? Or they weren't connected much to other people from different towns, so it kind of affected them in ways that would be realistic when you come to think of it. I don't specifically remember the names of the people that I liked, the side characters that I liked. I really liked the background of the young couple who had a child, and they were like despicable parents who abused their child or something like that. I felt that was a pretty accurate depiction of some young couples who are just not ready to have children but found themselves in such a situation in which they couldn't get out of it. Okay, next thing I didn't like was the slow pacing. What this book put a lot of time in is the world building, and though if you're the kind of person who likes very long descriptions of a certain place and bulky, I guess, or very thorough and detailed world building, you may like this book, but it's just not my kind of thing. So I found the very detailed descriptions of the place kind of boring and I just kind of wanted to skip through them, and it kind of did just scan through them a lot. More than half of the book was like spent describing the characters and the community. In a way, it kind of does that well, because it did set the mood for the entire story, but I just think for me it was a little too long and descriptive. So yeah, let's move on to the next book that I read this month, The Rise of Nine. This is another book by Pittacus Lore, and it is part of the Loring Legacy series. It's the third book in the series, and I gave this book 3 stars. If you want to get to know more of my thoughts about this book, you can check out the description and watch or skip to that part of my very long video. And yeah, there are spoilers there, so let's move on. Actually, that was the last thing I read for the month of May. Let's move on to June. First thing I read in the month of June last year was The Kissing Booth by Lexie Hill. I don't have the physical copy of this book anymore because I unhauled it. I'll just put up a picture there. So I gave this book 1 star. And so this book is about Lexie, who is this like high school kid who likes this guy and organizes a kissing booth just so she could kiss the guy she likes and kind of rid herself of her status of being an NBK, or never been kissed person. And that's the whole plot. They just make this kissing booth for this girl who was so desperate to be kissed. What did I dislike about this book? It was so shallow, and it was so cringeworthy and cheesy, and maybe if I read this when I was a lot younger, maybe 7th grade, I would have given it like 3 stars. But when I read it last year, it was just so it wasn't hard to get through because the writing was very simplistic and was really meant for a younger audience, but it was so cringeworthy for me. I couldn't wait to finish it, so I kind of rushed going through it. If you want more in-depth thoughts for this book, I'm going to make, hopefully soon, my video on unhauling some books that I have had on my shelf for like years but never actually read. So yeah, that's for that book. Moving on to the second book that I read in the month of June, which is The Fall of Five by Pittacus Lore. Again, this is the 4th book. I gave this book 5 stars, and again, video in the description. Next book I read in the month of June is... nope. The next book I read in the month of June is The Future of Us by J. Asher and Carolyn Mackler. Yep. And I gave that book 2 stars. And this is basically about these 2 teenagers, Emma and Josh, who get access to their own Facebook account 15 years from the present time. Okay, I just saw a bird, and they kind of unravel what kind of future they have for these certain actions or decisions that they make in the present. Again, this book I don't have a physical copy for because I unhauled it, and I'm going to be adding this to my unhauling video that will come up soon, I hope. Okay, next book I read in the month of June is The Revenge of Seven by Pittacus Lord, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the 5th book in the Lorraine Legacy series, and again, link in the description. This is the last thing that I read in the month of June, and it's gonna be a long one. This book is Tell Me 3 Things by Julie Buxbaum. So I gave this book 4 stars. So this book is about Jessie, who moves to LA from Chicago after her mom dies and her dad marries this rich woman. Jessie moves in with her dad in her stepmom's big ass house with her and her son from the last marriage. It kind of follows her as she treads through this new experience of being a new student in a high school in which a lot of rich people study. When she starts high school in this new school so yeah, when she starts, she gets this like message from this person named Somebody Nobody, I think, SN. She calls him him or her SN, and they kind of start this pen pal relationship. Thoughts. First is for the characters. Let's start with our main character, Jessie. So first thing that I got kind of disturbed about with Jessie is how she couldn't stand up for herself even when her like stepbrother Theo already helps her, and a lot of people have already tried to like tell her or encourage her to stand up for herself. She still doesn't like do it. It kind of comes across as her kind of enjoying being trampled on and feeling sorry for herself. I really didn't like how she was so freaking selfish all the time. Like if maybe she wasn't as selfish as she was, she would have been able to realize that other people around her were also going through a lot of shit, and she wasn't the only one going through it, but they were carrying it a lot better than she was. I just feel like because she was so stuck in her own world and her own problems, she failed to understand how other people were being affected by her actions. Next thing is the plot. I honestly thought that it was going to be a love square, which I hate. I'm gonna go into little spoilers here and say that I really thought it was a good idea to have Theo as like a gay character, because that kind of thwarted the whole love square thing that I thought was going to happen. However, had Theo been SN, it would have been really taboo, but then it would be interesting also, wouldn't it? Like, isn't that like a plot for some romance book out there? Let's move on to the next thing, the writing. One thing that I thought about the writing that doesn't really affect, I guess, my rating of the book is how there were weird, almost out of place parts in the book in which flowery words were injected. She would be like talking normally or like a teenager for this paragraph, and then suddenly there's like a very poetic line that comes out of nowhere and just shocks me and kind of puts me off. Okay, so let's move on to what I liked. First category are the characters. First, what I liked about Jessie is that she's really relatable, especially for high school teens. As a narrator, she says a lot about things that you wouldn't necessarily admit to other people. Like as a teen, you couldn't tell other people, and sometimes you can't even accept yourself, but she says these and they kind of hit the spot for me because I was kind of that unrequited person. Like she said a lot of things that were self-deprecating, but these things were like, I think, very normal or like typical of teenagers who have low self-esteem. And you know what, since I was a teen once who had low self-esteem and had low regard for myself, I also kind of understood what she was feeling and where she was coming from. when she said those things, especially from the beginning to the middle part when she wasn't developing yet. So these things particularly hit the spot for me when it comes to weight and her appearance, because let's face it, not everyone is conventionally pretty and are like skinny and bottle shaped, I guess. Next character that I really liked was Theo. I honestly thought that his character was more developed and more realistic and more layered a character than Liam or Ethan, whoever those people are, out of context thing. Next thing I liked is the plot. I like how it makes fun of itself. I like its pacing because it was really fast-paced, which is good for me because I like fast-paced books. From the very start, it already had that narrative hook for me, which was in the form of the whole anonymous pen pal thing. I really liked that, even though it was very implausible to happen in real life unless this person was like a killer or like a stalker or some weird person with nothing to do with their lives. But yeah, I found that really interesting and kind of cute. Wait, or like just interesting. Also, this book did a really good job in making you understand why the characters do the things that they do. For example, why Jessie chooses to say yes to this pen pal interaction with this random dude or girl who she doesn't even know the name of, but who already knows her. Next thing I liked is the relationship that was created between SN and Jessie. I really liked the banter and the cute conversations that they have. I think it had a good flow. It was gradual enough for me to believe it to be escalating to a certain point that was really realistic. Honestly, the relationship that SN and Jessie have is the reason why non-horny people go to Amigo and trying to find their pen pal there who hopefully lives near and can meet you and isn't like a psychopath or a sociopath or like a creepy stalker. Next thing I liked about the plot was how grief was handled. This is an own voices book, I guess, when it comes to grief, because the author herself lost her mom, I think, and I think that made the writing about the grief and loss of losing a very close family member. Yeah, you can really feel how genuine the emotions were in the writing. Let's move on to the things that I disliked about this book. Again, we'll go to characters and Jessie, our main character. So I really don't like the fact that she's the not like other girls kind of girl. I hate that trope so much, which kind of is the main reason why I bumped it down from 5 stars to 4 stars. I know I said a while ago that it was kind of relatable, how she painted herself to be like this ugly, or she didn't regard herself as a pretty or beautiful person, I guess. But what isn't realistic is the fact that despite her seeing herself this way, she is still liked by so many guys. And I thought you weren't pretty, I thought you were one of us, but like she isn't. Another thing that makes her like embody the not like other girls trope is how she doesn't like to go partying, and how like a character tells her there's something about her, and oh, that is the most cliche thing that I have ever read, or one of the most cliche things that you could tell a girl. And I just want to point out that there is something about everyone. If you see yourself as a girl who's not like other girls, you are definitely like those girls. Next thing I didn't like about Jessie is how she kind of ends up as this insecure, typical YA character. Again, she's not like other girls, and she always has to justify why she has to wear something girly. I kind of don't like that. It kind of paints these girls who wear girly things just because they want to as like a bad thing, or like something that should be frowned upon, I guess. And I know that maybe, I think this book was written, it was written in 2016, and I guess that was the time maybe when we were like subverting the stereotypes, and I kind of get it from that perspective. But now though, I would have to say that why do we have to shame these girls for being girly? Maybe just let other people wear whatever they want. Let's move on to the next character. Okay, I don't know if this is a little spoilery, so just put up a spoiler thing there if you want to read the book. But I'm gonna talk about Ethan, also known as SN. So that's the whole plot. Okay, I kind of didn't like his character because his character bordered a lot on being a cliche, because he was introverted, not understood by his peers, has to always put up like a front of being cool and reserved. It's kind of like Jughead in Riverdale. Like,
in case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in.
Yeah, he is exactly like that. Kind of see how he becomes this typical YA male character in how he wants to tuck her hair behind her ear, kind of thing that every dude wants to do for some reason. And also he memorizes poetry. I guess if you want to do that, fine, go ahead and do that, but it's just kind of annoying how he makes it his thing and like cringe. Let's move on to the next characters. Jem and Crystal. So these are girls who go to the same high school and kind of hate on Jessie for being that not like other girls kind of girl. I don't know, I'm talking like that. So I didn't like these characters because they were so shallow and very caricature type characters. They were just there to kind of create a contrast between what Jessie looks, or how unconventional Jessie is. So they're the typical mean girls. I also didn't appreciate or like their insults. They weren't even great insults. Like, if they're going to be the mean girls, then they might as well have these really witty comebacks. But they're like the typical insults that every person thinks that every mean girl thinks about. They use insults that aren't specific or don't actually mean anything because they're not applicable to the character. For instance, they call her a whore, slut, ugly bitch. And like, if I was Jessie, I wouldn't even be insulted by that, because how would it be applicable? It's like the typical things that other girls tell other girls when they hate on other girls. Okay, that was a lot of girls in one sentence, but you get what I'm saying, right? Jessie just kind of repeats this over and over in her head as if it's like the most hurtful thing that these girls could say about her, and she knows these are not true, but she still takes them to heart, and I don't know why. Why? Maybe had they said something like about her grieving or about her loss, or actual things that were applicable to her situation and to her character, maybe it would have been realistic for her to repeat that in her head over and over again and kind of kick herself for that. But these words were like so basic. Next thing I didn't like were the pity parties, which also contributed a lot to me giving it a 4-star rating instead of a 5-star rating. At the start, like I said, it was relatable, but it then kind of got tiring and repetitive because from the start to the end it was being repeated constantly, and you'd think that after all these things that the character goes through, she would have already developed and maybe have had collected a bit of confidence in herself, but surprisingly she didn't, and she still was that insecure and self-deprecating person that she was at the beginning. Kind of showed how she didn't even develop, and it was obviously something that could have been a great character development arc, but it wasn't. I don't know why it wasn't. Like, she still stayed the same person. Wouldn't it have been better? Not only for the character and the plot, but also for the readers, who are mostly young adults, to have this character grow from being this insecure and self-deprecating to kind of accepting who she was. Like, wouldn't that have made a bigger impact and a better message for the readers? I don't know. I think so, but the thing I also found the most annoying about these freaking pity parties were the ones with her dad, because she was obviously trying to create something or start something that wasn't really there. I don't know, they weren't warranted. So she was on fabricating these like false scenes or false intentions. It just kind of got annoying and a little selfish, because had she thought about people outside of her own mind, then she would have seen how her dad was going through the same things she was, but he was handling it a lot better than she was, because he didn't keep on hating other people for what happened to them as if it's her dad's fault that her mom died. And again, had there been lesser pity parties nearing the end, especially after her meet up with Scarlett, it would have been a great character arc for Jessie, but she didn't. And I don't know, what was the point then of Scarlett telling her against it? Because she didn't take it to heart at all. She was still the same person as she was when she started. Okay, I'm really passionate about this. But yeah, last thing that I didn't like about this book were parts of the plot. Like, for instance, the premise and the ending was obviously too good to be true. And yes, it's a kind of nice escapism or like a fantasy that one can live vicariously through when you're kind of going through like stuff in your own life, or if you're feeling lonely and whatnot, like me. But yeah, it was really unrealistic for me. I guess it's nice to kind of like think, what if these were possible? I guess that's the whole point of it. Another thing that I didn't like about the plot was how all the resolutions in the story were resolved almost at the same time at the end of the book. So everything was like neatly packed. It would have been better, I think, if it had gradual resolutions, or like she was solving her issues one by one throughout the book, maybe starting from like 3/4 of the book instead of just going all out on the ending. Because, you know, it's kind of rushed, and yeah, it was neatly packaged into one whole resolution at the end. So that's it for my bi-monthly wrap-up for May and June. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed ranting about pity parties and telling you guys about books that I don't actually talk about, like these things. That's it for this video. Like if you want, comment if you want. I would love to know what you read last year, and subscribe. Bye.